I'm talking to Dr. Lee Rotherham, who for many years has been an advisor to the government on European affairs, and he's also a member of the Bruges Group, which campaigns for a Europe of links, not chains. Dr. Rotherham, thank you very much for talking to RT. Now, first of all, tell me how much it costs the UK to be a member of the EU.
Well, that's both a very important question and a very tricky question to answer. In the first instance, the Treasury writes a cheque to the European Union every fortnight to the sum of £800 million. Now, that's not the whole picture, because that's the gross contribution. Some of that money comes back as part of the overall net deal, over which the Treasury has a very limited say, so that's not necessarily well spent. However, once you factor in the direct and the indirect costs associated with the EU membership, the overall bill for business and for the country could be as high as £100 billion a year. The problem is that nobody knows this because there has not been a cost-benefit analysis of EU membership. So there's a huge question mark there which the Taxpayers Alliance and other organisations are campaigning to get the answer to.
And where does that money go?
Well, a lot of it doesn't come back into the UK, because the UK is, after Germany, the second largest contributor to the EU budget, certainly in net terms, and along with a small number of northern European countries, is one of the few which are overall net contributors. So a country like France is much more, gets a lot more back for bang for the buck. So you could say that a lot of it goes in terms of subsidising and upgrading the superstructure and infrastructure of Eastern and Southern Europe, which, from a British taxpayer's viewpoint, one has to question. Is a British taxpayer contributing billions of pounds a year effectively to another country? Is that proper use of taxpayers' money?
So you're talking about 110 billion euros, which is an impossible figure for most people to understand. What does it mean? What would it buy in real terms?
Well, let's narrow this down a little bit more. I mean, 110 billion euros is the overall cost, including all the regulations and the red tape. So firstly, in terms of the regulations and the red tape, the cost of the regulations and red tape, and this is based on the Commission's own officials, the European Commission's own statistics, the cost of the regulations is, in terms of the UK, is greater than the actual value of the trade that is meant to regulate, because the regulations cover 10% of the British economy, which is our exports to the European Union, but actually cover 100% of the UK economy. 80% of it is internal, 10% is to the rest of the world. So 100% of the economy is paying the price of 10% of what is meant to regulate. So that's one perspective. The second thing is, if you just look at not the cost of the regulations, but the simple physical cost and the membership fees, that is the equivalent of forming a chain along a pier and dumping a block of gold off the end of it every 100 seconds. It's a gold ingot every 100 seconds, just cast into the watery depths.
And in terms of schools and hospitals, which is something that the UK desperately needs to upgrade, what about that?
Now, it's about a new hospital every 3 days. I think it pays for the royal family in 2 days. I think it's something like every 5 days is the equivalent of repairing every single cathedral in England. And when we were doing the research for a book 10 years on, which looks hypothetically at where the UK would be, indeed any country would be, were we to leave the European Union, once you start breaking down the benefits that we could be spending the money on other than into what's basically a financial sinkhole from the UK taxpayers' viewpoint, it's just an astonishing waste of money.
Isn't it a bit churlish in this sort of global economy to talk about British money for British people?
Well, not really, because the British taxpayer, of course, is funding taxes and would naturally expect the money to be spent on things which are of benefit to themselves. I mean, it's fundamentally their money. And you talk about a global economy, but of course the money isn't going to, fund North America. It's a European system. It's not a global system. So we're short of having a global economy with the European Union, if that's what you really like.
A lot of politicians say that it's just not realistic to leave the EU wholesale, but you think differently.
We already have, with respect to the European Union, about 10 different levels of association with the European Union. You have countries which are full members, such as France. You have countries which have got certain opt-outs, such as the UK, which has opted out of the single currency. You have countries which are part of the European Economic Area, such as Norway. You have countries which have slightly less of a EEA kind of agreement because they're EFTA countries, but have gone less far than that, such as Switzerland. You have countries which have got bilateral trading agreements, such as Canada and Mexico, which cover a wide range of things and are very similar in style to the EEC agreements, accession agreements from years back, without a lot of the burdensome regulations and the bureaucracy attached to that. And you go way down the there's even a special form of association for countries like North Korea. Now, I'm not saying we should have a form of association with the EU that Pyongyang has, but what I'm simply saying is if you have 10 different ways of trading and allying and associating with Brussels and the European Union, there's a mechanism in there somewhere which is appropriate for any country, and it doesn't have to be full membership.
And how would you characterise the UK's relationship with the EU currently, and how do you think it should change?
Well, we have to remember this in a perspective which is much broader than the narrower perspective that politicians like to tend to focus on. Politicians, when they talk about the European Union, talk about what's happening now, what's on the agenda now, what's on the agenda maybe in 3 months, and what happened over the last couple of years. Actually, the EU used to be the EC, and it used to be the EEC. And before then, it had a history of basically of associated agreements which predate the Pleven Plan and the attempted creation of a European defence entity. It's got a long history, and the key element here is it's all to do with ever closer union, which was indeed right from the outset within the preamble of the treaties. Now, if you consider that membership of the club is to do with always going in one particular direction, and you don't want to go in that direction, then the obvious conclusion is you can only do one of two things. You can either stop it and basically get to a stage where you're happy to live with the modus vivendi at that time. But if it continues, then the only other alternative is to actually leave that club and form a new association. After all, if you were a member of a golf club and your bills kept going up, and you had to basically, the rules changed so that you had to invite people around to your house every Sunday, and you had to put up lodgers, or you had to basically, you had a number of things which kept being added to the conditions of your being a member of this golf club, rather than just teeing off every now and again. You wouldn't be happy with that. So it's the same principle.
We live in a world, though, don't we, which is essentially dominated by superpowers, the United States, Russia, China and India. Don't the smaller countries of the European Union need each other?
Well, absolutely not. It's good that we're cooperating where we want to cooperate. It's good that we're trading where we want to trade. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, the European Union is, in the big picture, it's in danger of becoming a sclerotic part of the world. The rising economies in the world are obviously in the Far East, India, China, and also Brazil, Indonesia, and other places. Now, rather than linking ourselves too closely with one part of the world trading system, which is decreasing in importance, the UK or any European country should be more about being involved in a more proactive free trade across the whole of the world, rather than becoming part of a regional association which risks highly becoming a protectionist bloc. Now, you could also argue that the United States is a great world power and is very important for the UK, and therefore, if that's true, well, why don't we, rather than the EU, why don't we just sign up and become a state of the United States? Well, nobody's recommending that, so why on earth should we become part of a federal Europe? And I'll say one other thing on this. Canada and Mexico have signed an agreement with the US to form the NAFTA. They haven't signed an agreement to have a sort of a federal super government that encompasses all of them. They've created a different model. Different models do exist. ASEAN is a different model from the EU. There are different models on offer. Let's not pretend that it's either the EU or oblivion. There are lots of choices around there. And if we are having a global trading network in an interrelated post-McMahon age, then we shouldn't be too we're not little England, but little Europe.
What we're seeing in Europe at the moment is a degree of social unrest in response to the austerity measures because of the debt crisis. Do you see that impacting not just on the Eurozone, but on the European Union as a political entity?
Yeah, and the sad thing is, it was something that Eurosceptics were warning about even while the Eurozone was being created. We were saying that if you're going to be creating a currency union, then you have to have a full economic union in order to weather these shocks. And you have to have a model so that where there is an asymmetric shock in one part of the zone, either basically you can have the large numbers of unemployed being able to move from one part of the country to the other, or you have large amounts of financial reserves which are able to support the area in problems. Now, a couple of examples which your viewers might be familiar with. In the UK, you have, for instance, you have a single currency area. It's called a pound, obviously. And if Liverpool is in recession, what happens is, because there is social mobility in the UK, people from Liverpool go and find a job in Manchester or down London or whatever, and also you have a central government which pays part of the tax revenue into Liverpool in order to try and regenerate it. Now, people accept that because there is this sense of a demos, the sense of common citizenship and a sort of sharing together. We don't get in the EU. Same way in the States. If Chicago is in recession but California is booming, then people move from Chicago to California, and the federal government puts money in support of Chicago. Now, you can argue the pros and cons about federal levels of federal aid and the rest of it, but the simple truth is that the United States is a federal system which has 20 times the federal spending power of the European Union. The price for having that sort of model, which is more or less an effective economic system, is too high for the governments who were creating European Economic Union, because it acknowledged that already that it was a European superstate with a huge central bank and a role for large amounts of central taxation being spent across the place. It was a price too high to pay, but because the idealism is paramount, people went ahead with that all the same, and the Eurozone is paying the price today.
Dr. Lee Rotherham, thank you very much.
Thank you.